always held great admiration for the ship design in Star Trek, whether it was the original series, the Star Trek films, or any of the spin-off TV shows. But growing up in the 90s, I always had a special affinity for the Romulan Warbird. This model manages to be very sleek whilst incorporating some of the predatory qualities we'd associate with a bird of prey like an eagle. And we can see that both in the wingspan but also in the beak-like head of this ship. But there's also something very alien and mysterious about this ship, and I think that comes mainly from the fact that it has these big gaping holes where the centre of the ship should be. And whenever these ships would show up in any of the Next Generation or Deep Space Nine episodes, I would always be very thrilled to see them. Now sadly, to the best of my knowledge, I don't believe that Diamond Select ever released one of these Warbirds as part of their Starship Legends line. However, back in the 1990s, Playmates did. And it remains to this day one of the more in-demand and popular, but also quite difficult to get hold of ships from the Playmates line. So today for Star Trek Sundays, I'm going to unpack this and take a look at it up close. So as we saw with the Klingon attack cruiser, the packaging is very colourful. We have this illustration on the front of the packaging, which is very nicely painted. We can see the ship in an action pose as if it's warping through the system there, and we have some wonderful imagery of planetoids and the star field and something resembling a nebula. There's a clever use of complementary colours here that make this very, very attractive and makes it very displayable to this day. And despite being quite a long package, it is very narrow, so it is mercifully easy to store. On the flip side, we have just a photo of the toy against a sort of gradient background there, which is still quite nicely coloured actually. Nice to see the blue contrasting against that sort of magenta purple, which is very nicely done. And there's lots of text boxes highlighting the technical aspects of the model. And it is very much technical aspects of the ship as it appears in the TV show. It's pointing out things like the docking port or the cloaking device. Now these aren't things that you can interact with on the toy, and I suspect that's because there's actually very little that you can pull out of this toy because it doesn't actually have much in the way of action features. Now when you pull the model out of the packaging, it is all in one piece. There's no assembly required and there's no stickers or transfers really to attach to this model apart from one. In terms of the sculpting though, it is remarkably accurate to what we see on screen. All the lines and curves are perfectly in proportion, and it definitely feels like an authentic replica, albeit scaled down, of what we're used to seeing in the TV show. And there are plenty of little details in the sculpting. But I think what is most striking is the very flat colour of this ship. There isn't an awful lot of paint apps, in fact there are virtually none. And it's actually a real shame because the sculpt itself is very nicely done, and I think that this got over certain parts of this vehicle with a little bit of paint here and there would have made all the difference to really capitalise on that and make this ship really pop. As it is, it just looks a little bit bland and slightly unfinished. The other criticism I would have is that it doesn't come with a display stand. Now, again, you've got to be in the mindset of Playmates back in 1993, and of course, they were appealing to children. They were their primary market. They were not thinking about collectors. However, all these years later, as a grown-up collector, it would be really, really helpful to have had something, even if it's just a peg hole, to be able to place this on a stand somewhere. As it is, it's kind of awkwardly weighted, and it's kind of difficult to find a stand that will really accommodate this comfortably. And here at the head of the vehicle we can see the one single transfer that we have, which is the symbol of the Romulan Star Empire, which looks pretty good, but again, it just reinforces the fact that I think we needed more decoration on this vehicle to really help it pop and make it look its best. Whenever we see the ship in the TV show, certainly the head of the vehicle has an awful lot of lights on it, and I think it would have been very helpful, given that this does have an electronic component, to have seen those lights light up around the head of the vehicle. That would have made a huge impact, but sadly that is not here, which, as I said, is a real shame because there is an awful lot of attention to detail in the actual sculpt. Even on the inside of the wings of the vehicle and underneath, there is a lot of sculpting and detail and lines and panels and all sorts of bits and pieces that make this a really attractive model. It just desperately needs a paint wash over it just to enhance some of these fantastic details. Now, I was talking about the electronic lights and sounds. Starting with the lights, the only part of this vehicle that actually lights up are the two nacelles. And interestingly, it is a blue light rather than the green light that we're used to seeing in the TV show. Maybe they felt that the blue would be more striking, or maybe a blue bulb was just easier to find. Now, sadly, I would dearly love to be able to display this to you, but unfortunately, over the years, there's been some wear and tear, and this doesn't seem to work anymore on mine. There is a very faint flicker of light left in that bulb, but it's not strong enough to come out on camera. But I am pleased to say that the voice chip still works perfectly well, and you'll notice on the spine of the vehicle there are 4 buttons. Each one correlates to a different sound effect, and in the case of the second button, the cloaking effect, so we will see the nacelles light up blue. And so ultimately, there we have it. There's not an awful lot to this vehicle. In its favour, it's definitely very authentic to what we see on screen. I think the moulding is very, very nice. I think it's also nice that this is a fairly unique piece. There aren't many models, and certainly not many toys, with light and sound effects. This is a pretty cool thing for collectors. The box presentation is beautiful, and all these years later it still works very nice on display. You can suspend this from the ceiling and you can have it out on your shelf and it still looks pretty good. On the negative side though, there's really not a lot to it. Obviously there are no action features beyond the sound effects and lights, which is a real shame, and I think crucially it just needed a little bit more attention when it came to paint washes, or maybe something to be thought through a little bit more in terms of what other light features could have been used on this vehicle to really make it pop and stand the test of time. I think, for example, the Klingon attack cruiser still fares very, very well all these years later because it has just a little bit more colour and transfers which just help it to pop. If you enjoyed this video, please do give it a like and remember to subscribe as there'll be plenty more videos soon.